You can erase a man's name from the payroll, but you can't erase the truth from a machine that remembers. At exactly 2:17 a.m., every light inside Hawthorne Industrial Systems turned red. The massive control room, usually alive with the steady rhythm of humming servers and blinking green indicators, suddenly fell into an uneasy silence before alarm sirens burst through the air. Engineers rushed from one console to another. Supervisors shouted over one another. Across the enormous wall of monitors, one message repeated itself again and again. Critical synchronization failure. Thousands of precision aerospace components were trapped halfway through an automated heat treatment cycle worth millions of dollars. If the sequence collapsed, weeks of production would be lost. Worse, more than 30 maintenance workers were still inside the thermal section completing a scheduled inspection. "Restart the system," Operations Manager Nolan Price barked, slamming his hand against the control desk. "Do it now." Fingers hesitated above the controls. Nobody moved. One older shift supervisor swallowed hard before speaking. "Sir, Malcolm always said never reset during a 4.7-second oscillation." Nolan turned sharply, his face tightening. "Malcolm doesn't work here anymore." The room fell quiet. Nobody answered him. They all remembered the black single father who had walked out of this building 3 weeks earlier carrying nothing except a cardboard box, an old blue notebook, and the quiet dignity of a man who refused to argue. They also remembered something else. Malcolm Reed had never been wrong about the machines. A young technician nervously opened a drawer beneath the main console, searching for emergency procedures. Instead, his hand brushed against an old blue maintenance notebook someone had forgotten to remove. The cover was worn smooth from years of use. Inside, handwritten notes covered nearly every page with neat diagrams, pressure readings, and dates stretching back more than a decade. One sentence had been circled twice in blue ink. "If oscillation reaches 4.7 seconds, the fault is upstream. Do not reset." The young technician looked toward Nolan. "Sir." Nolan snatched the notebook away before anyone else could read it. "Outdated notes," he snapped. "Throw it away." No one moved. Outside, rain tapped softly against the giant glass walls of the operations center, while the warning lights reflected across polished concrete floors like pools of blood-red light. But inside, the loudest sound was not the alarms. It was uncertainty. More warning messages appeared across the monitors. Cooling phase unstable. Valve response delayed. Manual intervention required. Nolan wiped sweat from his forehead and forced confidence into his voice. "Listen to me. We hired experts for this system. We don't need old maintenance tricks." Yet even as he spoke, another alarm echoed through the building, louder than the last. Nearly 20 miles away, Malcolm Reed sat at the small kitchen table inside his modest house helping his 10-year-old son Jamal finish a middle school science project built from cardboard, batteries, and a tiny electric motor salvaged from an old fan. Jamal smiled proudly as the little propeller finally spun. "See, Dad? We fixed it." Malcolm smiled back. "No," he answered gently. "You fixed it. I just helped you listen to what it needed." Before Jamal could answer, Malcolm's phone vibrated across the table. The caller ID simply read Lewis. Malcolm's expression changed before he even answered. Lewis never called this late unless something was terribly wrong. Malcolm picked up immediately. He didn't ask about management. He didn't ask who was in charge. He didn't ask whether anyone finally believed him. His first question came without hesitation. "How many people are still inside the thermal section?" Lewis's breathing was uneven. 32. Malcolm closed his eyes for one brief moment. Through the phone, beneath the frantic voices and screaming alarms, he heard something almost no one else would notice. A faint mechanical pulse repeating every few seconds. He counted silently. 1, 2, 3, 4.7. His eyes opened. "Don't let anyone restart the system," he said quietly. "Whatever they're telling you, don't let them touch that reset button." Lewis hesitated. Nolan already ordered it. Malcolm looked across the table at Jamal, who had stopped smiling. The boy already understood where his father was about to go. "Dad, Jamal asked softly. Did they finally say they were sorry? Malcolm reached for his old work jacket hanging by the door. He shook his head once. No, Jamal looked down at the little motor they had just repaired. Then why are you going back? Malcolm picked up his truck keys without another word before finally answering in the calm voice that had carried him through every hardship since losing his wife. Because the people inside that building didn't fire me. 3 weeks earlier, the control room had been calm enough to hear the steady hum of cooling fans and the distant rhythm of conveyor motors rolling through another overnight production run. Nothing looked unusual to anyone except Malcolm Reed. He stood quietly beside the engineering console, his weathered blue maintenance notebook resting beneath one arm while a pressure graph crawled slowly across the monitor. Every few seconds, his eyes shifted away from the screen and toward the sound of the relay cabinet behind the wall. Click, pause, click, pause. The pattern was almost invisible to everyone else, but not to the man who had spent 12 years listening to machines before trusting what software claimed they were doing. Malcolm leaned closer to the display, entered a series of measurements into his notebook, then circled one number twice. For 0.7 seconds. He walked directly to the morning operations meeting where executives gathered around a polished conference table covered with glossy presentations celebrating the company's newest automation upgrade. Nolan Price stood confidently beside the projector with a polished smile that always seemed ready before the facts arrived. The new control software has increased efficiency by 9%, Nolan announced. Our outside consultants confirmed every system is performing above expectations. Malcolm waited until the applause faded. The synchronization filter is hiding an upstream oscillation, he said calmly. If the delay reaches 4.7 seconds during a full production cycle, the control system could issue the wrong recovery sequence. The room became quiet for only a moment. Nolan smiled politely before answering. Those readings come from outdated calibration methods. Malcolm did not argue. He simply opened his notebook and slid it across the table. Every reading is timestamped. I recommend delaying the final rollout until we inspect the relay sequence. Across the table, Chief Executive Officer Vanessa Whitmore folded her hands together with practiced composure. Her voice remained warm, almost reassuring. Malcolm, everyone appreciates your dedication, but innovation requires confidence, not fear. Malcolm looked directly at her. Confidence does not change physics. Several department managers exchanged uncomfortable glances. No one interrupted. Vanessa nodded toward Nolan. Our engineering leadership has reviewed the data. Nolan immediately advanced another colorful slide filled with smooth graphs and green indicators. The software automatically filters harmless signal noise, he explained. What Malcolm is seeing is simply legacy behavior from older equipment. Malcolm studied the graphs for only a few seconds. Those charts have been averaged, he replied. Show the raw signal. Nolan hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second before answering. Raw data is unnecessary for executive review. Malcolm closed his notebook without another word. The silence in the room became heavier than any argument could have made it. Vanessa finally stood. We have made our decision. She walked toward Malcolm carrying a neatly prepared envelope. Your years of service are appreciated, but this company is moving in a different direction. Effective immediately, your position has been eliminated. Nobody celebrated. Nobody objected. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead while Malcolm accepted the envelope with both hands. He never raised his voice. He never demanded another chance. Instead, he looked once more at the pressure graph still glowing on the conference screen. The machine will keep trying to tell you the truth, he said quietly. Whether anyone listens is no longer my decision. He packed a framed photograph of Jamal, his coffee mug, and his old blue notebook into a cardboard box. As he walked through the production floor for the last time, a young mechanic stopped him near valve section 6. Mr. Reed, this temperature sensor has been acting strange all week. Malcolm glanced at the display. It is not the sensor. He removed a worn connector, cleaned the contacts, tightened one loose fitting, and watched the readings stabilize immediately. There, he smiled. Now your night shift will have one less problem. The mechanic looked confused. Why are you helping after what they did? Malcolm placed the wrench back into the toolbox. Because the machine does not know who signed my termination papers. Before leaving the building, he found Lewis, the veteran shift supervisor. Malcolm handed him the blue notebook. Keep this close. If anything ever feels wrong, start with page 42. Lewis frowned. You think something is coming? Malcolm looked back toward the towering control room windows where executives were already congratulating one another. I hope I am wrong, he answered softly. But hope has never repaired a system. Evidence does. Lewis held the blue notebook for a long moment after Malcolm disappeared through the factory doors, as though its weight had suddenly become much heavier than paper and ink. He opened it carefully, expecting scattered maintenance reminders, but every page revealed something different. Dates, temperatures, pressure readings, hand-drawn diagrams, tiny observations written in careful handwriting beside every unusual vibration, every delayed valve response, every electrical fluctuation that most technicians would never have noticed. This was not a notebook someone kept for themselves. It was a map left behind for whoever came next. Lewis slid it into the bottom drawer of the main control console before beginning another overnight shift, never imagining how soon he would need it. Outside the factory, Malcolm drove home beneath gray skies that matched the silence inside his pickup truck. Jamal was waiting on the front porch wearing his backpack even though school had already ended for the day. The boy smiled the moment he saw his father. Did you get off work early? Malcolm looked at the cardboard box resting on the passenger seat before forcing a gentle smile. Something changed today. Jamal climbed into the truck without asking another question. Children often understood more than adults realized. On the drive home, Malcolm stopped at a neighborhood grocery store where he quietly calculated every purchase before placing it into the cart. Milk, bread, eggs, peanut butter. Jamal reached toward a box of cookies, then noticed his father checking the prices. Without saying a word, he quietly placed the cookies back on the shelf. Malcolm saw the gesture through the corner of his eye but pretended not to notice. Pride sometimes meant allowing kindness to remain invisible. During the following days, Malcolm accepted temporary repair jobs wherever he could find them. He fixed an elderly woman's broken furnace before the weather turned cold. He repaired the ventilation fan inside Jamal's elementary school science classroom after learning the district could not replace it until the next budget cycle. At a small neighborhood repair shop, he restored old generators and electric motors that other technicians considered beyond saving. Every customer thanked him. Every machine left working better than before. Yet every evening, before dinner, Malcolm opened another notebook identical to the blue one he had left behind and wrote the day's observations with the same discipline he had practiced for years. Jamal finally asked one night, "Why do you still write everything down if you do not work there anymore?" Malcolm smiled while drawing a small wiring diagram. Good habits should never depend on who signs your paycheck. Meanwhile, inside Hawthorne Industrial Systems, Nolan proudly introduced the company's new consulting partner from Hale Systems. Engineers applauded polished presentations filled with colorful charts and promises of greater efficiency. Whenever someone mentioned Malcolm's old maintenance procedures, Nolan laughed politely. "We are leaving outdated thinking behind," he would say. "Modern software catches everything automatically." Most employees nodded, but not all of them. Lewis noticed something strange during nearly every overnight shift. Once every few hours, the pressure graph hesitated for just a moment before returning to normal. The delay lasted only seconds, too brief to trigger any official warning. Yet every time it happened, he remembered the circled note inside Malcolm's notebook. For 0.7 seconds. Late one evening, curiosity finally overcame him. Lewis opened the blue notebook to page 42. Between detailed sketches of the B-17 control loop, he found another handwritten sentence underlined twice. If warning lights disappear before the vibration disappears, trust the vibration. Someone is filtering what the system is trying to tell you. Lewis frowned. That sentence had never appeared in any official maintenance manual. As he turned the page, something unexpected caught his attention. A narrow strip of torn paper still clung to the notebook's binding. It looked as though someone had carefully removed an entire page. Along the torn edge, only a few incomplete words remained visible. Vendor override. Test cycle 0217. Lewis stared at the damaged binding, his heartbeat slowing instead of racing. Pages did not simply vanish from Malcolm Reed's notebooks. Someone had intentionally removed that one. Before he could study it further, his office phone rang. The caller identification displayed the executive floor. Nolan's voice came through almost immediately. "Lewis, I need you to bring Malcolm's notebook upstairs." Lewis glanced once more at the torn page before quietly closing the cover. "What notebook?" he asked, and for the first time in many years, he decided not to answer his manager with the whole truth. Lewis slipped the blue notebook into his locker instead of carrying it upstairs. For the rest of the shift, he could not stop thinking about the missing page or Nolan's sudden interest in a notebook he had dismissed as obsolete only weeks earlier. Something no longer fit together. When sunrise painted the factory windows with pale orange light, Lewis quietly walked through the production floor before heading home. Every machine appeared to be running normally. Green lights blinked in perfect order. Digital dashboards displayed healthy numbers. Yet, as he paused beside the B-17 control cabinet, he heard it. Click, pause, click, pause. The same tiny hesitation Malcolm had noticed. Barely noticeable, easy to ignore, impossible to forget once you knew it existed. Instead of filing another report through management, Lewis opened the notebook again. Malcolm had written a sentence beneath one carefully drawn diagram. Never trust one source of information. Listen with your eyes. Measure with your hands. Confirm with the machine. Lewis rested his fingertips against the metal cabinet. The vibration matched the rhythm Malcolm had described weeks earlier. Before he could investigate further, Nolan appeared behind him carrying a tablet and wearing the same confident smile that had become familiar across the factory floor. "Everything all right down here?" Nolan asked casually. Lewis nodded. "Just checking the vibration." Nolan barely glanced at the cabinet. "The new software compensates for that automatically." Lewis looked toward the monitor. "Then why is the relay still lagging?" Nolan's smile faded for only a second before returning. "Because old equipment has personality. The numbers are what matter." He walked away before Lewis could ask another question. Those words stayed with Lewis long after the conversation ended. The numbers are what matter. That afternoon, Malcolm finished repairing a portable generator for a local landscaping company. The owner offered him an extra $50 because the engine now ran quieter than it had in years. Malcolm politely refused the bonus. "Pay your apprentice instead," he said. He stayed late to help. The young apprentice looked surprised. Nobody had ever turned down extra money at the shop before. Malcolm simply gathered his tools and headed toward Jamal's school. He arrived just in time to watch the science class testing homemade wind turbines across the playground. Jamal's small project spun steadily while several larger designs struggled against the changing breeze. His teacher smiled. "Your father explained torque to the whole class yesterday after fixing our ventilation fan. The students have been talking about it ever since." Jamal looked proudly toward Malcolm. "Dad says machines always tell the truth if you listen long enough." Malcolm laughed softly. "Machines do not lie. People sometimes misunderstand what they hear." Miles away, another misunderstanding was beginning to grow inside Hawthorne Industrial Systems. Victor Hale, the senior representative from Hale Systems, entered Nolan's office carrying a slim laptop case. He quietly closed the blinds before speaking. "Did you recover Reed's notebook?" Nolan shook his head. "Lewis claims he has never seen it." Victor remained silent for several moments. "Find it," he finally said. "If anyone compares those handwritten notes with the software revision logs, they may start asking questions neither of us wants to answer." Nolan folded his arms. "There is no proof." Victor looked directly at him. "There does not need to be proof. There only needs to be curiosity." After Victor left, Nolan opened the engineering archive on his computer. He searched Malcolm Reed's personnel records, maintenance reports, training certifications, and project history. Several files appeared incomplete. Others had been archived years earlier. One folder required executive authorization. Nolan frowned. Why would an ordinary maintenance technician have restricted engineering files? Before requesting access, he noticed something unusual. According to the archive, Malcolm had not simply maintained the B-17 control system. More than a decade earlier, he had participated in its original commissioning team. Nolan stared at the screen for several seconds before quickly closing the folder as footsteps approached outside his office. At nearly the same moment, Lewis returned to his locker intending to take another look at the blue notebook. He opened the locker door and froze. The notebook was still there, but someone had carefully shifted it a few inches from where he had left it. Nothing else inside the locker had moved. Only the notebook. Lewis slowly opened the cover. Resting between pages 41 and 42 was something that had not been there before. A small yellow sticky note containing only 4 handwritten words. "Stop looking. It is over." Lewis folded the yellow note and slipped it into his pocket without showing anyone. Whoever had entered his locker knew exactly what they were looking for, yet they had left the notebook behind. That made the message even more unsettling. It was not a theft. It was a warning. The next morning he arrived nearly an hour before the rest of the shift and walked alone through the control room. The giant monitors glowed softly in the dim light while the ventilation fans filled the air with their familiar steady hum. Everything appeared perfectly normal until he unlocked the engineering diagnostic screen Malcolm had taught him years earlier. The polished executive dashboard showed every system operating within acceptable limits, but the raw diagnostic display told a different story. Every few minutes, a tiny ripple appeared deep inside the synchronization data before disappearing almost immediately. It lasted less than 5 seconds. Most technicians would never notice it because the software averaged the readings into smooth green lines. Lewis quietly opened the blue notebook beside the keyboard and compared Malcolm's handwritten observations with the live data. The numbers matched almost perfectly. For 0.7 seconds. Again, he reached for a portable vibration meter and walked toward the B-17 relay cabinet. Instead of watching the monitor, he rested one hand against the metal housing exactly the way Malcolm always had. The vibration arrived before the alarm ever could. It was subtle, almost like the faint heartbeat of an old clock hidden inside a wall. At that exact moment, another engineer entered the room. "What are you doing?" the younger technician asked. Lewis smiled without looking up. "Listening." The young engineer laughed politely. "The computer already tells us everything." Lewis answered in the calm tone he had learned from Malcolm. "Only if somebody lets it." Across the building, Victor Hale stood inside a secure conference room reviewing software revision logs with Nolan. A graph appeared on the large display showing filtered system data. Victor tapped one section with his finger. "As long as executives only see this dashboard, nobody will notice the oscillation." Nolan nodded. "And if someone checks the raw historian?" Victor closed the laptop halfway before replying. "Most people do not even know it exists." Nolan remained silent for a moment before asking the question that had been bothering him since discovering Malcolm's archived engineering records. Why would a maintenance technician leave notes detailed enough to predict this? Victor looked directly at him. Because Malcolm Reed was never just a maintenance technician. Before Nolan could ask another question, Victor changed the subject and reminded him about an upcoming visit from the chairwoman of the board, Dr. Evelyn Brooks. "She likes evidence," Victor said carefully. "Give her results. Do not give her reasons to ask technical questions." Meanwhile, Malcolm spent the afternoon repairing an emergency backup generator at a small community church. The pastor thanked him for arriving on such short notice and apologized that the congregation could not afford his usual rate. Malcolm smiled as he tightened the final electrical connection. "Pay me enough to cover the parts," he answered. "Use the rest to help someone who needs it more." As he packed his toolbox, his phone vibrated. It was Lewis. Malcolm answered immediately. "Did someone get hurt?" Lewis exhaled with relief. "No. Not yet. He described the filtered readings, the repeated 4.7-second delay, and the strange note inside the locker. Malcolm listened without interrupting. When Lewis finished, Malcolm asked only one question. "Did you compare the dashboard with the raw historian?" Lewis stopped walking. "How did you know?" Malcolm looked toward the quiet generator humming steadily beside him. "Because machines rarely fail all at once. First someone ignores the sound. Then someone hides the numbers." Lewis lowered his voice. "I think somebody removed a page from your notebook because it explains exactly what is happening." Malcolm closed his eyes for a brief moment. Page 43. Lewis turned the pages carefully until he reached the torn section. "What was on it?" Malcolm answered so softly that Lewis almost missed the words. "The only place where I wrote down who requested the software override during the original test cycle." Before Lewis could ask for the name, another alarm sounded through the factory in the background of the call. It lasted only 2 seconds before stopping again. Malcolm did not need to see the control room to know what had happened. He looked toward the darkening sky and whispered, almost to himself, "The system has stopped whispering. Soon it will have no choice but to shout." The alarm that echoed through the factory lasted only 2 seconds, but for Lewis it changed everything. Temporary warnings came and went every day. This one was different because it appeared exactly where Malcolm had predicted. Instead of calling Nolan, Lewis quietly opened the engineering historian hidden beneath the executive dashboard. Unlike the polished display shown during management meetings, this archive stored every signal exactly as the machines produced it before software filtered the data. Thousands of lines of information scrolled across the monitor. Temperatures, pressure levels, valve positions, electrical timing. Then he found it. At precisely 2:17 in the morning, the synchronization signal dipped for 4.7 seconds before returning to normal. The executive dashboard showed nothing unusual. The raw historian recorded every detail. Lewis stared at the screen in disbelief. Malcolm had not guessed. He had measured it years earlier. Before he could save the report, footsteps approached behind him. He quickly minimized the window just as Nolan entered the control room carrying a cup of coffee. "Everything looking good?" Nolan asked with effortless confidence. Lewis nodded slowly. "Mostly." Nolan glanced toward the monitors. "Dr. Evelyn Brooks arrives tomorrow morning. The board wants to see smooth operations, so let us avoid unnecessary concerns." Lewis watched Nolan leave before reopening the historian. One entry immediately caught his attention. A system access record showed Malcolm Reed's engineering account had logged into the control software 3 nights after he had been terminated. Lewis frowned. That was impossible. Malcolm's security badge had been deactivated the same afternoon he left the building. He immediately called the Information Technology office. A technician answered after several rings. "Can you verify whether Malcolm Reed's account was active 3 weeks ago?" The technician typed for several moments before responding. "No." Human Resources disabled his access at 4:48 in the afternoon. Nobody could have logged in afterward. Lewis looked back at the historian. The entry remained exactly where he had seen it. Someone had used Malcolm's identity without using Malcolm's account. Across town, Malcolm spent the evening helping Jamal assemble shelves inside the small bedroom they shared with stacks of books and science projects. As they tightened the final screw, Jamal smiled. "Everything fits better when you take your time." Malcolm laughed softly. "That is true for machines and for people." The phone rang again. Lewis explained what he had discovered, including the impossible login record. Malcolm became silent. "Read me the exact timestamp," he said. Lewis did. Malcolm immediately answered. That was the night Victor Hale's team finished the software update. Lewis sat down slowly. "You remember the date?" Malcolm replied. "I remember every major change made to that control system because I helped commission it." Lewis hesitated. "Nolan found engineering files that say you worked on the original project. Why did nobody ever know?" Malcolm looked through the window where evening rain drifted quietly across the neighborhood street. Titles never repaired machines. Work did. Before Lewis could continue, Malcolm asked another question. Does the historian show which workstation created the login record? Lewis searched again. After several seconds, he whispered, Terminal 7. Malcolm closed his eyes. Terminal 7 is inside the contractor diagnostics room. Regular employees cannot even enter that room. At Hawthorne Industrial Systems, Victor Hale was reviewing maintenance schedules when his assistant informed him that Dr. Evelyn Brooks had requested unrestricted access to the production floor rather than a conference presentation. Victor's expression changed for the first time. She wants the floor? He asked. Quietly. Yes, the assistant replied. She specifically requested raw operational data instead of executive summaries. Victor slowly closed the folder in front of him. Prepare every dashboard before she arrives. The assistant nodded. And the historian? Victor remained silent for several moments before answering. Nobody ever asks for the historian. Early the next morning, Lewis arrived before sunrise carrying the blue notebook beneath his jacket. As he stepped into the control room, he noticed a black sedan pulling into the executive parking area. A woman stepped out wearing a simple navy coat instead of an expensive business suit. She paused beside the factory entrance, closed her eyes for one brief moment, and listened to the distant sound of the production line before walking inside. She did not begin by greeting executives. She did not ask for quarterly profits. Her very first words surprised everyone standing nearby. Before anyone speaks, Dr. Evelyn Brooks said calmly, I would like to hear what the machines have been trying to say. Dr. Evelyn Brooks did not walk through the factory like a visitor. She walked through it like someone greeting an old friend whose voice she had not heard in years. While executives prepared presentations filled with polished charts and optimistic forecasts, she ignored the conference room entirely. Instead, she stopped beside the first relay cabinet, rested one hand lightly against the steel enclosure, and closed her eyes for a brief moment. This building has a different rhythm than it used to, she said quietly. Nobody answered. Nolan quickly stepped forward with a confident smile. Our modernization program has significantly improved efficiency. Dr. Brooks looked at him politely. Then let us begin with the raw historian. The smile on Nolan's face barely changed, but Lewis noticed his shoulders stiffen. The executive dashboard contains everything you need, Nolan replied. Dr. Brooks shook her head gently. Dashboards explain conclusions. Historians explain facts. Without another word, she walked directly toward the engineering console. Lewis silently unlocked the historian window before anyone asked him to do so. Thousands of data points appeared across the screen. Dr. Brooks studied them without speaking. Her eyes moved slowly across pressure curves, relay timing, and synchronization records until they stopped at one repeating pattern. Interesting, she murmured. 4.7 seconds. Nolan immediately answered. A harmless fluctuation that the software automatically corrects. Dr. Brooks did not look away from the screen. Software corrected the display, she said calmly. It did not correct the machine. The room became noticeably quieter. Victor Hale stepped forward with practiced confidence. Our consultants verified that every fluctuation remains well within operating tolerance. Dr. Brooks finally turned toward him. Did you verify the relay physically? Victor hesitated. Our diagnostics are digital. She nodded once. Machines are physical. Lewis felt the weight of Malcolm's blue notebook beneath his jacket. Every sentence Dr. Brooks spoke sounded strangely familiar. It was the same philosophy Malcolm had repeated for years. Listen before assuming. Measure before deciding. Verify before believing. Dr. Brooks requested a manual inspection of the B-17 relay cabinet. Several engineers followed her onto the production floor, while executives exchanged uneasy glances behind them. The massive production line continued operating with its usual precision, but the closer they moved toward the relay enclosure, the more noticeable the faint mechanical hesitation became. Click, pause, click, pause. Dr. Brooks rested her fingertips against the cabinet for only a few seconds before opening her eyes. This relay is responding late. Nolan quickly answered, only by milliseconds. Dr. Brooks smiled slightly. Sometimes milliseconds become millions of dollars. Lewis carefully removed the access panel. Inside, every component appeared clean and professionally maintained. Nothing seemed damaged until Dr. Brooks leaned closer to one relay assembly. "Who authorized this replacement?" she asked. Nolan frowned. "Replacement?" She pointed toward the identification plate mounted on the relay. "The serial number begins with H7-9. The original commissioning documents specified H74. Lewis looked closer. She was correct. The relay had been replaced with a newer model that looked nearly identical but carried a different response specification. Victor immediately replied, "Equivalent components are common during maintenance." Dr. Brooks remained calm. "Equivalent does not mean identical." Lewis opened Malcolm's blue notebook and quickly turned to the relay diagrams. There, beside a carefully drawn illustration, Malcolm had written a simple instruction years earlier. Never replace H74 with H79. Delay appears only under full synchronized load. Lewis quietly handed the notebook to Dr. Brooks. She studied the page for several seconds before looking back at the relay. "Who wrote these notes?" Lewis answered without hesitation. "Malcolm Reed." Dr. Brooks repeated the name softly, as though searching through an old memory. "Malcolm Reed." She slowly closed the notebook and asked another question. "Where is he now?" Silence settled across the production floor. Finally, Lewis answered, "He was terminated 3 weeks ago." Dr. Brooks looked first at the notebook, then at the relay, then toward the executives standing several yards away. No anger appeared on her face, only disappointment. "So the person who documented the problem is gone," she said quietly. Yet the problem remained. Before anyone could respond, another engineer hurried toward the group carrying a printed system report. "Dr. Brooks," he said nervously, "we found something unusual in the access logs." She accepted the report and read only the first few lines before her expression changed. According to the system records, Malcolm Reed had approved the relay replacement himself. Dr. Brooks looked back at Lewis. "Can a terminated employee authorize engineering changes after losing system access?" Lewis answered immediately, "No." Dr. Brooks folded the report once and slipped it into her notebook. "Then someone is not simply hiding a defect," she said in the same calm voice. "Someone is writing a false history." The words settled over the production floor with far more weight than anyone expected. Someone is writing a false history. Nobody argued. Nobody volunteered another explanation. Even the steady sound of conveyor motors seemed quieter as Dr. Evelyn Brooks continued examining the relay assembly. She removed a small flashlight from her coat pocket and studied the identification plate once more before asking Lewis a simple question. "When was this relay installed?" Lewis searched the maintenance database and frowned. "According to the official record, 3 weeks ago." Dr. Brooks nodded toward the metal housing. "Read the manufacturing date." Lewis leaned closer. 4 years ago." She smiled faintly. "Then the maintenance record is already telling 2 different stories." Nolan immediately stepped forward. "Replacement parts often remain in inventory before installation." Dr. Brooks looked at him without raising her voice. "That is true. Which warehouse shelf did this one come from?" Nolan hesitated for only a second. "I will have purchasing verify it." "Please do," she replied. "I would also like the warehouse transfer logs, receiving records, and installation authorization." Victor Hale remained composed, but Lewis noticed him quietly sending a message from his phone before sliding it back into his pocket. A few minutes later, another employee approached Nolan and whispered something into his ear. Nolan excused himself almost immediately, claiming he needed to verify documentation. Dr. Brooks watched him leave without attempting to stop him. Instead, she turned back toward the relay cabinet and gently closed the access panel. "Machines leave evidence," she said softly. "People leave paperwork. Both deserve equal attention." While executives hurried between offices collecting reports, Lewis quietly followed Dr. Brooks into the engineering archive. She requested access to the original commissioning documents rather than the recent maintenance files. The archive clerk unlocked a secure cabinet filled with binders that had not been opened for years. Dust floated through the morning light as Dr. Brooks carefully removed a thick engineering manual labeled B17 commissioning records. Inside were handwritten inspection sheets signed by dozens of engineers who had built the system from the ground up. Lewis slowly turned another page and suddenly stopped. There, beside an approval signature dated more than a decade earlier, appeared a familiar name. Malcolm Reed. Not listed as a maintenance technician. Listed as Control Systems Commissioning Specialist. Lewis looked at Dr. Brooks in disbelief. He helped build this system. Dr. Brooks did not appear surprised. I remember interviewing him, she said quietly. He was the youngest engineer on the commissioning team, but he noticed failures that experienced designers overlooked. Lewis stared at the signature again. Then why was he working maintenance? Dr. Brooks gently closed the binder. Because some people choose responsibility over recognition. Across the building, Nolan entered the warehouse records office and requested every transfer document related to relay inventory. The clerk searched for several minutes before shaking her head. The H79 relay does not appear in any warehouse transfer during the past year. Nolan's expression tightened. Search again. She did. The answer remained the same. No shipment. No transfer. No installation request. It was as though the relay had appeared inside the control cabinet without ever passing through company inventory. At nearly the same time, Victor Hale quietly called one of his field supervisors. Tell me every contractor who entered the diagnostics room during the software upgrade, he said. The supervisor answered almost immediately. Only 2 names appear on the access log. Victor closed his eyes. Read them. The first name belonged to one of Victor's own software engineers. The second name caused him to grip the phone more tightly. It was Nolan Price. Back inside the archive room, Lewis compared Malcolm's blue notebook with the original commissioning binder. Every relay diagram matched perfectly. Every handwritten notation appeared in the same careful style. Then one small detail caught his attention. A corner of the commissioning blueprint had been folded inward. Hidden beneath the fold was a handwritten reference number that matched the missing page from Malcolm's notebook. Lewis unfolded the paper completely and found a notation written in blue ink years earlier. If relay replacement is ever required, verify serial number against commissioning photograph before energizing the system. Dr. Brooks immediately requested the original commissioning photographs. The archive clerk typed several search commands before looking up with a puzzled expression. That file existed yesterday, she said quietly. It disappeared this morning. The missing photographs changed the atmosphere inside the archive more than any spoken accusation could have. Engineering drawings could be copied. Maintenance logs could be edited. But commissioning photographs captured moments exactly as they happened, leaving very little room for interpretation. Dr. Evelyn Brooks remained remarkably calm. Deleted files usually leave footprints, she said, especially when someone is in a hurry. She asked the archive clerk to retrieve the overnight server activity report instead of searching for the photographs again. Within minutes, a detailed access log appeared on the screen. Hundreds of routine file requests filled the report until one entry caught Lewis's attention. The commissioning photograph folder had been opened just after 5:30 that morning, less than an hour before Dr. Brooks arrived at the factory. The user account listed beside the request belonged to Facilities Administration. Lewis frowned. Facilities employees do not even have permission to open engineering archives. The clerk nodded slowly. Normally they do not. Dr. Brooks leaned closer to the screen. Who authorized the temporary access? Another search revealed the approval had been submitted from an executive workstation only minutes earlier. The authorization itself carried Nolan Price's digital approval code. Lewis looked toward the hallway where Nolan had disappeared almost half an hour earlier. He knew you were coming, Lewis said quietly. Dr. Brooks folded her hands calmly. Preparation is not the problem. Concealment is. At that very moment, Nolan entered the executive conference room where Victor Hale was waiting. Before either man spoke, Victor noticed the concern on Nolan's face. What happened? Nolan answered honestly for the first time in days. She is not looking at reports. She is rebuilding the timeline. Victor remained silent. Nolan continued. She found Malcolm's commissioning records. She knows the relay does not match the original design. Now she is tracing every document. Victor walked to the window overlooking the production floor below. Employees continued working, unaware that years of carefully arranged paperwork were beginning to unravel one detail at a time. Can she prove anything? Victor finally asked. Nolan hesitated. Not unless someone finds the original commissioning photographs. Victor slowly turned back toward him. Then those photographs must never reappear. Meanwhile, Lewis quietly stepped outside the archive to call Malcolm once again. Malcolm answered from the small repair shop where he had just finished replacing a damaged electrical panel for a neighborhood grocery store. Lewis explained everything that had happened, including the missing photographs and the server access logs. Malcolm listened patiently before asking an unexpected question. Did anyone check the commissioning backup? Lewis looked confused. Backup? Malcolm smiled softly. When we commissioned the control system, Dr. Brooks insisted that every inspection photograph be stored in two places. One copy stayed in the archive. The other was written onto the original startup media that remained sealed unless the system required complete restoration. Lewis stood motionless. Where is it? Malcolm answered without hesitation. Inside the fireproof engineering vault beneath the main control room. Lewis hurried back inside and shared the information with Dr. Brooks. She did not appear surprised. Instead, she smiled with quiet satisfaction. That was my policy, she said. I wanted the truth protected even if every computer failed. Together they walked toward the secured engineering vault accompanied by the archive clerk. Access required 2 authorization keys, one held by the chairwoman and one stored permanently inside the facility. After several minutes, the heavy steel door slowly opened. Shelves lined the room from floor to ceiling, each containing carefully labeled emergency records dating back decades. The archive clerk located a sealed metal case marked Original System Startup Media. The security seal remained completely intact. Dr. Brooks inspected it carefully before breaking the seal herself. Inside rested several optical storage disks together with handwritten verification forms signed years earlier by every member of the commissioning team. Lewis immediately recognized Malcolm's signature among them. An engineer inserted the first disk into an isolated recovery computer. Slowly, file after file appeared on the monitor. Calibration reports. Start-up videos. Inspection records. Finally, a folder labeled commissioning photographs opened successfully. Hundreds of images filled the screen. Lewis searched rapidly until he found the relay cabinet from the day the system entered operation. The original relay identification plate was clearly visible. H74. Dr. Brooks quietly compared the photograph with the relay now operating inside the factory. The numbers did not match. Then Lewis noticed something else in the corner of the photograph. Standing beside the newly commissioned control cabinet was a younger Malcolm Reed, holding the blue notebook in one hand while explaining something to Dr. Brooks herself. The timestamp showed the image had been taken 12 years earlier, only minutes before the system officially entered service. Dr. Brooks looked at the photograph for a long moment before speaking almost to herself. The man they dismissed was the very person who taught this factory how to listen.